I found out my fiancé was still married and now I want revenge. You know, this was supposed to be the happiest time of my life. Seriously. The dress? Chosen. The venue? Booked. Invitations? Already in the mail. I was just weeks away from marrying the man I genuinely thought was my soulmate, my absolute everything. And then, just like that, one single, sickening discovery, and the whole world I'd built with him, the entire future I'd pictured, it all just came crashing down. This wasn't just some little white lie. Oh no. This was a carefully, meticulously crafted deception. He wasn't just my fiancé. He was already someone else's husband. It felt like the air was sucked right out of my lungs. A physical blow, the kind that knocks you sideways and leaves you gasping, wondering what hit you. How could this even be real? The man who held my hand, who whispered all those promises of forever, was already bound by those exact same vows to another woman. My beautiful fairy tale didn't just shatter, it exploded, revealing this horror story I was suddenly living. And right there, in that moment, standing in the ruins of my heart, something new started to smolder, pure rage. And with it, this deep, burning desire for justice, or maybe, just maybe, revenge. It all kicked off so innocently, almost like a scene out of some cheesy rom-com. I met Michael, or at least, that's the name he fed me, at a local coffee shop. I was completely lost in a book. He accidentally spilled a bit of his latte near my table, and, smooth as anything, used it as an excuse to start talking. And boy, was he charming. Ridiculously so. He had this easy smile, eyes that genuinely seemed to sparkle when he looked at me, and this incredible knack for making me feel like I was the only person in the entire world. He told me he was an architect specializing in sustainable design. He talked so passionately about creating these beautiful, eco-friendly spaces. He painted these vivid pictures with his words, dream homes, innovative buildings. He was smart, witty, and just seemed to have this amazing depth to him. We talked for hours that very first day, and when he asked for my number, I gave it to him without a single hesitation. Our first date? Utterly magical. He took me to this tiny Italian restaurant, tucked away on a quiet side street, the kind of place you'd never stumble upon unless you were in the know. He'd apparently called ahead, and our table was ready, a cozy corner booth. He even remembered I'd casually mentioned loving tiramisu, and he'd made sure they had the best in town. It was all these little things, these incredibly thoughtful gestures, that just reeled me in, hook, line, and sinker. The whole courtship was a whirlwind. He was so attentive, so affectionate, and unbelievably romantic. Flowers would show up for no reason at all. He'd plan surprise weekend getaways to these charming little bed and breakfasts, and leave handwritten notes on my pillow. He'd cook for me. These elaborate meals he claimed were old family recipes. He made me laugh until my sides literally ached and held me tight when I cried over a rough day at work. He just seamlessly wove himself into every part of my life. My friends absolutely adored him. They were always saying, "You finally found a good one." My parents, who were naturally cautious, were completely won over by his respectful demeanor and how obviously devoted he seemed to be to me. He'd chat with my dad about sports and compliment my mom's cooking with such genuine sincerity. He was, in every single way, perfect. Or so I truly believed. He was always a bit vague about his past. He'd mentioned a tough childhood, an estranged family, which, conveniently, explained why I never met any of his relatives. He said he'd moved around a bit for work, which covered why he didn't have many deep local connections. It all sounded so plausible, fitting perfectly into this narrative of a self-made man who was finally ready to settle down. He was just so good at it, so utterly convincing. Looking back now, the red flags were definitely there, tiny, almost invisible threads in this rich tapestry of lies, but I was so blinded by love, I just couldn't see them. I desperately wanted to believe in him, in us. After a whole year filled with what I thought was real love and shared dreams, he proposed. It was on the anniversary of our first meeting, at that very same little Italian restaurant. He got down on one knee, holding out this beautiful vintage-style ring, and his eyes were shimmering with what I thought were unshed tears. He talked about a future together, about having a family, about growing old side by side. My yes was instant, tearful, and absolutely joyful. The next few months were a complete blur of wedding planning. Choosing the venue, this stunning old vineyard. Agonizing over the guest list. Cake tasting, dress fittings. Michael seemed involved in every single step. He had opinions on flower arrangements, on the band, on the catering. He'd hold my hand during the stressful moments, always reassuring me that the only thing that mattered was that we were getting married. He seemed just as excited, just as invested as I was. We even found this lovely little house we planned to buy after the wedding, closer to his supposed new project. He'd spend hours describing how we'd decorate it, the garden we'd plant. It all felt so incredibly real, so tangible. Any money he put towards the wedding was always in cash. He claimed it was just easier that way, that he'd been saving up, and that he didn't like credit card trails for big expenses. Again, maybe a little odd, but he had an explanation for everything, didn't he? So smooth. I realize now, of course, this was probably to avoid any financial links that could be traced back to his other life. He was meticulous, a true professional con artist. He was building this elaborate fantasy, and I was his completely unwitting co-star. He was an absolute expert at emotional manipulation, making me feel cherished and totally secure, all while laying the groundwork for his ultimate betrayal. The love of my life was nothing more than a carefully constructed persona, a role he played with Oscar-worthy dedication. And I, utterly besotted, gave him a standing ovation every single day. The first tiny crack in his perfect facade showed up about 6 weeks before the wedding. It was something really small, almost insignificant. Michael had always been a little cagey with his phone. He kept it on silent a lot, always screened down, and would often step away to take calls, saying they were work-related, and he didn't want to bore me with contractor talk. I'd always respected his space, you know? But one evening, he left his phone on the coffee table when he went to grab a shower. A message pinged, and just out of habit, I glanced over. It was just a name, Sarah, followed by, "Can you call me back?" It's about the school play. Innocuous enough, right? Maybe a colleague with a kid. But something about it just felt off. Michael had never, ever mentioned to Sarah. And the casualness of the school play didn't quite line up with the high-powered architect persona he projected, the one who supposedly dealt with blueprints and zoning permits, not PDA meetings. I tried to just brush it off. But my mind? It latched onto it. A tiny seed of unease had been planted. Over the next few days, I started noticing other small things that didn't quite add up. He'd mention a meeting in a part of town that made 0 sense for his supposed office location. He'd be vague about his weekends if I wasn't with him, saying he was catching up on designs or on-site. Once, I even called his office number, a number he'd given me early on, which always went straight to this generic voicemail, just to see if he'd pick up. He didn't, of course. Later, he said he'd been in a signal dead zone at some construction site. His excuses were always plausible, always so smooth. But that little seed of unease? It was starting to sprout. The real unraveling, though, began with a piece of misdirected mail. Sounds like such a cliché, I know. But hey, sometimes life is a cliché. A letter arrived at my apartment, addressed to Michael, but with a slightly different last name. Michael Peterson instead of Michael Carter, the name I knew him by. I almost just returned it to sender, thinking it was a mistake. But curiosity, now fueled by that growing unease, got the better of me. My heart was hammering against my ribs as I carefully opened it. It was a credit card statement, and not just any statement. This one had a balance that made my eyes water. And there, listed among the transactions, were dozens of purchases I didn't recognize at all. Payments to a department store in a town I'd never even heard of. Subscription services I knew for a fact he didn't use. And then, the kicker, several charges for children's clothing stores and a toy emporium. Children. Michael had always said he wanted kids with me, someday, but he'd never, ever mentioned having any already. My hands were shaking. This couldn't be right. There had to be an explanation. Identity theft? A mistake by the credit card company? I confronted him that evening, trying to keep my voice calm, really trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. I showed him the letter. For the very first time since I'd known him, Michael looked genuinely flustered. Truly, visibly shaken. He stammered, trying to laugh it off. He said it must be a mistake, some clerical error, that Carter and Peterson probably got mixed up sometimes. He claimed someone with a similar name must live nearby, and the mailman just messed up. But his eyes wouldn't meet mine. And that smooth charm? It was gone, replaced by this desperate, almost frantic energy. He snatched the letter from my hand, saying he'd sort it out. But I couldn't let it go. That night, I didn't sleep a wink. My mind just raced, replaying every single conversation, every shared moment, desperately searching for the truth. The name Sarah echoed in my head. The school play. The children's clothes. The different last name. It was like a horrible puzzle, and the pieces were slowly, terrifyingly, starting to click into place. The next day, While he was supposedly at some critical all-day site inspection, I did something I'd never, ever done before. I became a detective in my own life. I went onto his laptop. He was usually so careful, but I guess his panic about the letter had made him sloppy. He hadn't closed down his email. My blood ran cold. There were emails. Hundreds of them. Not to Michael Carter, architect, but to Michael Peterson. Emails from Sarah Peterson. Loving emails. Mundane, everyday domestic emails. Emails about their children. 2 of them. A boy and a girl. Emails discussing mortgage payments on a house in a suburban town about an hour away. A town I now recognized from that credit card statement. There were photos. Family photos. Michael, my Michael, smiling, with his arm around Sarah, 2 young children beaming at the camera. Christmas photos, birthday parties, family vacations. A whole life. A whole other life. I honestly felt like I was going to be sick. The room started spinning. This wasn't just a lie. This was an entirely fabricated existence he had presented to me. He wasn't just Michael Carter, my fiancé. He was Michael Peterson, Sarah's husband, father to their children. The man I was planning to marry was already married. The realization hit me with the force of a physical assault. The shock was so profound, like a cold wave washing over me, leaving me numb and trembling. Disbelief was at war with this dawning, sickening certainty. Every shared memory, every whispered promise, every loving gesture was now completely tainted, recast as some cruel manipulation. The depth of the betrayal was just unfathomable. He hadn't just lied about his name or his marital status. He had lied about everything. His job, his past, his entire identity as I knew it. I dug deeper, this desperate, painful excavation of his deceit. Social media searches under Michael Peterson and Sarah Peterson brought up even more. Public profiles, mostly locked down, but with enough visible information to confirm everything. Friends congratulating them on their wedding anniversary just a few months prior. Photos of him with the children, looking every bit the doting father. The man I loved didn't exist. He was a con artist. A bigamist. The wedding we were planning? It would have been a total sham, a void marriage in the eyes of the law. He was committing a crime, and he was dragging me right into it. Bigamy, I'd soon learn, is illegal in all 50 states, a serious offense. The penalties can range from hefty fines to actual imprisonment. The pain was excruciating, like a raw, gaping wound in my soul. How could someone do this? How could he look me in the eyes every single day, tell me he loved me, plan a future with me, all while knowing he was living such a monumental lie? The emotional trauma was immense, this feeling of being utterly shattered. I had given him my heart, my trust, my future, and he had taken it all and just stomped on it with cold, calculated indifference. Those sustainable designs he talked so much about? Probably just words he'd picked up somewhere to sound impressive. The estranged family? Such a convenient excuse. The business trips? Likely weekends spent with his real family. I printed everything. The emails, the photos, the social media profiles. All the evidence of his double life, his monstrous deception. Each page felt like another twist of the knife. But as the shock started to recede, something else began to bubble to the surface. A cold, hard anger. A fury so intense it almost choked me. He had played me for a complete fool. He had tried to destroy my life, my ability to trust, my very belief in love. He had stolen my time, my emotions, and a significant amount of my money that I'd poured into our sham wedding. And I knew, with this chilling certainty, that I couldn't just let this go. He wasn't going to get away with it. Not this time. The love story was well and truly over. A different kind of story was about to begin. A story of exposure, of justice, and yes, of revenge. The sheer weight of the evidence I'd collected felt like a physical burden. For 2 days, I just walked around in a daze, the betrayal a constant, throbbing ache in my chest. I barely ate, barely slept. Every single time I looked at the wedding dress hanging in my closet, a wave of nausea would just wash over me. That beautiful, innocent white gown now seemed like a shroud, a symbol of my naivety and his monstrous deceit. I had to confront him. I owed myself that much, at least. But I wasn't going to do it impulsively. No, I needed a plan. This wasn't just about some emotional outburst. This was about exposing him, about making damn sure he faced consequences for what he had done. Discovering his bigamy wasn't just a personal heartbreak. It was a criminal act. I chose the moment carefully. It was a Saturday morning. He was his usual charming self, making pancakes in the kitchen, humming some cheerful tune. The sheer normalcy of it, contrasted with the grotesque reality I now knew, was sickening. He was a master actor, still playing his role to absolute perfection, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking. I had laid out a folder on the table, the one containing all the printouts, the emails, the photos, the social media profiles of Michael Peterson and his family. Michael, I began, my voice surprisingly steady, though my heart was pounding like a drum. We need to talk. He turned, a pancake turner still in his hand, a smile plastered on his face. Sure, babe. What's up? More wedding jitters. His casualness was like a slap in the face. I pushed the folder across the table. Who is Sarah Peterson? And who are these children? The smile vanished. Instantly, his eyes darted to the folder, then to me. For a split second, I saw that raw panic again, the same look he did when I showed him the misdirected credit card statement, only amplified 100 times. He tried to recover, to bluff his way out. What is this? Some kind of joke? He stammered, his voice suddenly strained. He reached for the folder, but I placed my hand firmly on top of it. No, Michael. Or should I say, Michael Peterson? The joke's over. I opened the folder and spread out the photos of him with Sarah and their children. His wedding photo with her. Their family Christmas card. His face went ashen. The color just drained from it, leaving him looking pale and gaunt. He stared at the evidence, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The suave, confident architect was gone, replaced by a cornered, pathetic liar. I can explain, he finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. Explain. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that didn't even feel like my own. Explain how you're married to another woman? Explain how you have 2 children you conveniently forgot to mention? Explain how you were planning to commit bigamy, a felony, by marrying me? My voice rose with each question, fueled by months of pent-up hurt and this growing, righteous anger. He started to spew this torrent of excuses. That his marriage to Sarah was over, that they were separated, that the divorce was almost final. He claimed he loved me, that I was his true soulmate, that he was going to tell me, but he was just waiting for the right time. The lies were so transparent, so pathetic, I almost felt a flash of pity for him. Almost. The right time? I shot back. After we were married? After you'd made a complete fool of me? After you completely destroyed my life? I told him I knew everything. I knew his real name. I knew where he lived. I knew about his wife and kids. I watched the carefully constructed world he'd built around his lies just crumble before my very eyes. He tried to touch me, to plead with me, his eyes welling up with what I now recognized as pure crocodile tears. Please, don't do this. I love you. We can work this out. Love me. I pulled away as if his touch was actual venom. You don't know the meaning of the word. You're a con artist. A fraud. You prey on people's emotions. You build these elaborate fantasies, and you don't care who you destroy in the process. I thought of all the money I'd lost, the emotional devastation, the public humiliation that was surely going to follow. The confrontation was absolutely draining, but also strangely empowering. Seeing him stripped of his charming facade, seeing the real, cowardly man underneath, it just solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about my broken heart anymore. This was about stopping him from doing this to anyone else. I want you out, I said, my voice cold and hard. Pack your things and get out of my apartment. Now. He continued to plead, to bargain, to lie. But I stood firm. I watched as he hastily threw his belongings into a bag, the belongings of Michael Carter, the fictional character he had played. It was a surprisingly small amount of stuff, I realized. Most of his life was a lie, so of course, he wouldn't have much tangible evidence of his fake persona here. As he stood at the door, bag in hand, he turned for one last, desperate appeal. You're going to regret this. You're throwing away something special. The only thing I regret, I told him, looking him straight in the eye, is ever believing a single word that came out of your mouth. This isn't the end, Michael. This is just the beginning. You are going to pay for what you've done. He left, and as the door slammed shut behind him, a profound silence filled the apartment. The silence of a shattered dream. But in that silence, a new determination was born. The decision was made. I wasn't just going to pick up the pieces of my life. I was going to war. I was going to contact a lawyer. I was going to explore every single legal avenue to hold him accountable. And I was going to make absolutely sure Sarah knew exactly who her husband really was. He thought he could just walk away and move on to his next victim. He was sorely mistaken. This was my turning point. My pain was now my fuel. If you or someone you know has been the victim of a similar kind of deception, please please know you're not alone. There are resources out there that can help. Sharing your story can be such a powerful first step. You might want to subscribe for more stories about overcoming adversity and fighting for justice. The days after that confrontation were just a whirlwind of emotions. Grief, anger, betrayal, and this strange, cold clarity. The very first thing I did was call off the wedding. That meant a series of absolutely excruciating phone calls, to vendors, to guests, to my family and friends. Explaining why, even in the vaguest terms, was humiliating. Irreconcilable differences felt like such a weak, paltry excuse for the monumental fraud that had actually occurred. But I wasn't quite ready to share the full, sordid details with everyone just yet. That would come. My next call was to a lawyer. I found a reputable firm that specialized in family law, but also had experience with fraud cases. Sitting in that sterile office, recounting my story, laying out all the evidence I had gathered, the emails, the photos, that credit card statement. It felt like an out-of-body experience. It was like I was talking about someone else's life, some tragic character in a movie. But it was my life. My lawyer, Ms. Davies, was incredible. She was so compassionate, but also fiercely professional. She listened patiently, her expression growing more and more serious as I detailed Michael's, or rather, Peterson's, elaborate deception. When I finished, she looked right at me and said, "What he did is not just morally reprehensible, it's illegal. Bigamy is a criminal offense. Your planned marriage would have been void from the very outset." She explained all the legal ramifications for him. Depending on the state, bigamy could be a misdemeanor or a felony, carrying penalties including fines and potential jail time. In our state, it was a felony. And beyond the criminal aspect, there was the civil side, the financial deception, all the money he had conned out of me for wedding expenses, the emotional distress. While recouping all the emotional damages is incredibly hard, she said we could certainly pursue him for the tangible financial losses. She also mentioned that his legal wife, Sarah, would have grounds for annulment or divorce based on his actions. The first step, Ms. Davies advised, was to file a police report. The thought terrified me a little, making this official, getting the authorities involved. But I knew it was necessary. He needed to be held accountable not just by me, but by the law. We also talked about the process of potentially suing him for fraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The most daunting task, though, was contacting Sarah, his wife, the other victim in his elaborate, cruel game. I had her address from the emails, her face from the photos. She deserved to know the truth about the man she was married to, the father of her children. What if she didn't believe me? What if she was somehow in on it? Though, honestly, the evidence strongly suggested she was just as clueless as I had been. My lawyer advised caution, suggesting that perhaps a letter from her office, outlining the situation, might be the best initial approach. But I felt this personal obligation. I decided to write her a letter myself, carefully worded, including copies of some of the key evidence, our engagement photos, wedding invitations, and a brief, factual account of his double life with me. I explained who I was, what he had done, and that I truly believed she was also a victim of his deceit. I included my contact information, just hoping she would reach out. It was one of the hardest letters I've ever had to write in my life. While I was waiting for a response, and for the legal wheels to slowly start turning, I began the incredibly painful process of dismantling the wedding, canceling the venue, the caterer, the florist. Each call was like a fresh stab of pain, a brutal reminder of what had been stolen from me. Many vendors were understanding, though not all the deposits were refundable. The financial hit was significant, adding another layer of injury to the emotional devastation. He had so methodically extracted money from me, often in cash for wedding expenses, which I now realized was likely funding his charade or maybe even his other family. Romance scammers, I was learning, often engage in this kind of financial fraud. My friends and family were my absolute lifeline during this period. Their support was unwavering. Some were shocked into silence. Others were absolutely furious on my behalf. Sharing the full story with my closest circle was cathartic, though it also brought this fresh wave of shame and embarrassment. How could I have been so blind? But they constantly reassured me that it wasn't my fault, that con artists like Michael Peterson are absolute masters of manipulation. They target kind, trusting people. About a week after I sent the letter, Sarah called. Her voice was trembling, barely a whisper. She'd received my letter, my evidence. She was, as I had suspected, completely devastated and utterly blindsided. She'd had her own suspicions, she admitted. Michael had been distant, secretive, often away for business trips. But she never, ever imagined this. He had woven this complex web of lies for her too, different lies, but lies nonetheless. She confirmed his real name, their address, their children. She confirmed he was very much still married to her. Our conversation was long and tearful. Two women, strangers, brought together by the deceit of one man. We shared our stories, our pain, all the details of his manipulations. It was a strangely bonding experience. She thanked me for having the courage to tell her, even though it had shattered her world. She, too, decided she would be taking legal action. She would be filing for divorce, and she would cooperate fully with the police investigation into his bigamy. Armed with Sarah's statement and my own, Ms. Davies and I went to the police. Filing the report was a formal, somber process. But as I signed my name to that official complaint, I felt this sense of grim satisfaction. This was it. There was no turning back. He was no longer just my problem. He was a problem for the justice system. The investigation began. Detectives interviewed me, then Sarah. They started looking into his financials, his movements. It was a slow process, frustrating at times, I won't lie. But every small step forward felt like a tiny victory. Beyond the legal pursuit, I started to think about other ways to expose him. He had preyed on women in the past. I was almost sure of it. The way he operated was just too polished for this to be his first time. I wanted to warn others. I began to research online forums and support groups for victims of romance scams and con artists. The stories I read were heartbreakingly similar to my own. That charming facade, the elaborate lies, the financial and emotional exploitation. I decided I would share my story more widely when the time was right, not just for catharsis, but as a warning. If his face and his methods were out there, maybe, just maybe, it would prevent him from ensnaring another unsuspecting victim. My quest for revenge was transforming. It wasn't just about making him pay in some vindictive sense. It was about dismantling his ability to deceive, to destroy. It was about reclaiming my own narrative, not as a victim, but as a survivor who fought back. The legal battle was just one front in this war. The other was ensuring his con artist days were well and truly over. The wheels of justice, as they say, turn slowly. But they do turn. The police investigation into Michael Peterson's bigamy and fraud charges took months. It involved gathering bank records, phone records, and corroborating statements from me, from Sarah, and from others who had been peripherally involved, like vendors who'd received those cash payments from him. During this time, my life felt like it was completely on hold, yet somehow, I was in constant motion, working with Ms. Davies, providing information, and desperately trying to piece my emotional state back together. The emotional toll was just immense. There were days I honestly struggled to get out of bed, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me like a physical force. Trust, which I once gave so freely, now felt like this precious commodity I was terrified to extend. I second-guessed everything, everyone. The world, which had once seemed so full of promise, now felt like a landscape riddled with potential deceptions. I started therapy, which helped immeasurably. Talking through the trauma, the anger, the grief, with a professional who really understood the psychological impact of such a profound betrayal was crucial. It was a slow process, learning to rebuild my self-esteem, which had taken a massive hit. It's a common effect, this self-doubt, constantly questioning if you were somehow to blame, if you missed obvious signs. Sarah and I stayed in touch. We became these unlikely allies, united by our shared, awful experience. Her own journey was fraught with pain as she navigated the implosion of her marriage and the impact on her children. She was incredibly strong, so determined to protect her kids and build a new life for them, free from his lies. Her courage was a genuine inspiration to me. Then came the news. Michael Peterson had been arrested. The charges included bigamy and several counts of fraud related to the money he had obtained under false pretenses from both me and, as it turned out, other financial deceptions linked to his double life. Seeing him in a mugshot, stripped of all his fabricated charm, looking like the common criminal he actually was, brought this complicated wave of emotions. There was no joy, not really, but there was a definite sense of grim vindication. The system was working. The legal proceedings were drawn out, as these things often are. There were hearings, motions, and eventually, a trial date was set. He pleaded not guilty, of course. His defense attorney tried to paint him as this man who had just made mistakes, who loved two women, who simply got in over his head. It was disgusting to listen to, but Ms. Davies and the prosecutor were incredibly well prepared. Testifying in court was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Facing him again, recounting all the intimate details of our relationship, the proposal, the wedding plans, and then the devastating discovery of his lies, all under the cold, intense scrutiny of the courtroom, was harrowing. But I looked him straight in the eye, and I told my truth. Sarah testified too, her voice shaking but firm, detailing her years of marriage to him and the absolute shock of his betrayal. The evidence was overwhelming. The financial trails, the conflicting documents, our testimonies. The jury didn't take long to deliberate. Guilty, on all counts. The sentencing came a few weeks later. Michael Peterson was sentenced to several years in prison. The judge, in her sentencing remarks, spoke of the profound emotional and financial damage he had inflicted, the calculated nature of his deception, and the blatant violation of the sanctity of marriage. It wasn't the maximum possible sentence, but it was significant. He was going to pay, with his freedom, for the lives he had shattered. As I walked out of the courtroom that day, I didn't feel elation or even that fiery revenge I had once craved so badly. Instead, I felt this quiet sense of closure. A chapter had ended. A painful, traumatic chapter, yes, but one that had also taught me about my own strength, my resilience. The aftermath wasn't easy. The scars of his betrayal will likely always be there, a reminder of a truly dark time. But they are also a testament to my survival. I slowly began to rebuild my life, piece by piece. I focused on my career, reconnected with friends, and cautiously, eventually, started to believe that not everyone was a con artist. I did share my story, anonymously at first, on a forum for victims of romance fraud. The outpouring of support, and the sheer number of similar stories, was astonishing. It really made me realize how prevalent these kinds of scams are. Later, I even considered more public ways to raise awareness. Maybe that podcast I'd idly thought about, to give other women a voice. Exposing his tactics, his methods, it felt like a way to take back some of the power he had stolen. Financially, I managed to recoup some of the wedding expenses through a civil suit, though not all of it. The emotional cost, of course, could never be quantified or repaid. But I was no longer defined by what he did to me. I was defined by how I responded. I chose to fight. I chose to seek justice. I chose to heal. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this and maybe sharing it. Awareness is such a powerful tool against deception. And if you're going through something similar, please remember that seeking legal counsel and emotional support are absolutely crucial steps towards reclaiming your life. Looking back, the journey from a starry-eyed fiancé to a woman confronting her con artist ex in court was, without a doubt, the hardest I've ever faced. The love I thought was so real turned out to be nothing more than a meticulously crafted lie, designed purely to exploit and deceive. Discovering my fiancé was already married wasn't just a heartbreak. It was an earthquake that completely leveled my world. But from those ruins, I found a strength I never knew I possessed. That initial desire for revenge. It evolved into a fight for justice. Not just for myself, but for his wife, Sarah, and for anyone else who might have fallen prey to his schemes. We exposed his deceit, we faced him in court, and we saw him held accountable for his crimes. This experience changed me profoundly. It taught me about the darkness that can exist in people, but it also taught me about the incredible resilience of the human spirit. It taught me the importance of trusting my instincts, of looking beyond the charming facade. And most importantly, it taught me that even after the deepest betrayal, it is possible to heal, to rebuild, and to reclaim your life. He tried to break me, but he failed. I am not a victim. I am a survivor. And my story, I hope, serves as a warning to others and perhaps a beacon of hope for those who are currently navigating their own path out of the darkness of deception. Thank you for listening. What you think about this story? Write in the comment your opinion. On my channel, you can watch other revenge or cheating stories. See you soon, my dear viewer.